If you're enjoying the Heath Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Heath Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey, fellow health geeks. I'm curious, what do you think is one key to being healthy and happy? Is it nutrition? Exercise? What do you think, Eleanor?
I have a whole set of keys. I'm not sure there's one key. Maybe there is one key.
There's one thing we're going to talk about today.
There's too many keys on my key ring.
That researchers say could lead to and be very protective of our health and lead to a long, happy life. What are we talking about, Eleanor?
The Good Life.
What's The Good Life?
The Good Life is a book that we have decided to read together and share what we thought about it with you all. It's written by Robert Waldinger, who is a physician, an MD, and Marc Schultz, who is a Ph.D. Marc is the Associate Director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development and Chair and Professor of Psychology at Bryn Mawr College, whereas Robert Waldinger is a Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, Director of the Center of Psychodynamic Therapy and Research at Massachusetts General Hospital, and he's Director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development. So these people have really spent a career diving into what makes a good life. So they've written a book, The Good Life, Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. And that is an accomplishment.
Yes. And then in this little orange strip, it says, create a more meaningful and satisfying life. So these authors not only tell us about the Harvard study, this longest scientific study of happiness, but they give us applications of how we can apply the lessons they've learned.
That word lessons is the key, I think, in this title, because they say lessons from what we've learned. It's like, well, it's not, we can describe it to you, but so what? And what they've come up with is some tools that we can incorporate. And I think Kristen and I are probably going to develop those tools a little bit as we get into this.
Yes.
Yeah.
So have you heard...
Wait a minute, what I was going to say about the book, you know how I always get critical about the book. This was published by Simon & Schuster in New York, so it's a really well-reviewed and edited book. Lots of good references, and there is a lovely table of contents that shows the scope of what they're going to be going over. And I'm thinking anybody that is maybe unhappy or knows someone that's unhappy, this would be a really interesting book to open up and look at. But now, that's all I was going to say. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. And I would just add to that even just somebody who wants to live a happy life, right? A long, happy life, and looking for meaning and wanting to reflect and like hearing other people's stories.
Oh, that's an idea. You know, I said scientific lessons, a lot of these studies, but this book reads by stories. He introduces you to Wes and Peggy and Mark, and you just get, engaged in these people's stories, and it's a nice way to share this information. Did you find that?
Oh, I loved it. It was a
the
big,
style,
warm, fuzzy feeling as I read it.
Yeah, and the style surprised me because I thought we were going to have charts and tables and, graphs of all these populations and so on and so forth.
And while that would have been cool, I really appreciated this.
Yeah.
Lighthearted read, and they did change their names to protect
sure.
confidentiality of the study participants. But yeah, I loved the stories and getting to know these people's lives.
Yeah, and they looked at it from the perspective of, what makes the relationship good, why they matter, what is this winding path of life that we all go through, and are there stages in there that are different? and then maybe you should invest in developing these relationships, and then when you screw them up, what can you do about it? And then they came at it from perspectives of like, okay, you have relationships that are intimate, you have relationships with your family, you have relationships at work. They just looked at this from all perspectives, and it's a really good read. I think we're going to recommend it highly.
Yes. Well, let's start with what is this Harvard study? Have you heard of it?
That's not recommending it while high, right? That's different.
Oh, dear.
That's another book we're going to be reading.
Okay, just making sure.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Clarification's always good.
Yes.
So basically, this all started in 1938. Mm-hmm. Researchers tracked the lives of two groups of men.
But, Arlie Block, the chief investigator in 1938, was a professor of hygiene. Have you ever heard of that one?
No.
And he was the chief of student health services at Harvard.
He was the one that started the study?
In the 1938s.
Okay.
I think he had another partner with him, but Arlie Block.
So one group was a group of sophomores in college.
Mm-hmm. At Harvard. Which has characteristics.
Yes. The second group of boys was from Boston's poorest neighborhood.
Yeah, and they wanted to, instead of focusing on what makes people sick, these two researchers, or this one in particular, said, it'd be kind of interesting just to find out, what keeps people healthy, which is a real radical flip because we've been doing all this stuff with penicillin and, diseases, the microbial, and so there's a whole lot of therapeutic research going on. Because you're sick, we need to fix you. And this was like, maybe we could keep you healthy, which was radical. I loved it.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it reminds me of the blue zones that we always go back to. Mm-hmm. And, they were interviewing these tribes of people that were living to 100 years old and wondering, asking them, like, tell me about your life. But what makes this Harvard study unique is that they didn't just rely on people's memories of their lives. And I have a clip that I'd love to play from Robert Waldinger talking about the Harvard study.
To remember the past. And as we know, hindsight is anything but 20/20. We forget vast amounts of what happens to us in life, and sometimes memory is downright creative. But what if we could watch entire lives as they unfold through time? What if we could study people from the time that they were teenagers all the way into old age to see what really keeps people happy and healthy? We did that. The Harvard study of adult development may be the longest study of adult life that's ever been done. For 75 years, we've tracked the lives of 724 men. Year after year, asking about their work, their home lives, their health, and of course, asking all along the way without knowing how their life stories were going to turn out. Studies like this are exceedingly rare. Almost all projects of this kind fall apart within a decade because too many people drop out of the study, or funding for the research dries up, or the researchers get distracted, or they die, and nobody moves the ball further down the field. But through a combination of luck and the persistence of several generations of researchers, this study has survived. About 60 of our original 724 men are still alive, still participating in the study, most of them in their 90s. And we are now beginning to study the more than 2,000 children of these men. And I'm the fourth director of the study. Since 1938, we've tracked the lives of two groups of men. The first group started in the study when they were sophomores at Harvard College.
I think it's really important for us as readers to understand the rigor of this research that they did. And so he does take a little bit in the beginning of this book talking about how do you scientifically approach a question, particularly like what makes us happy or what is a good life. And so he was mentioning these longitudinal studies And he also compared them to another way that we can investigate populations is cross-sectionally. You can take a slice of time, just do a measurement at a point, and they're kind of limited because there's no context. And so these longitudinal studies go over a long time. And he said, 70 years or more. And
that was a couple years or several years ago.
Yeah, so I think in this book he mentions 84 years. Right. But you can do the retrospective over time, look back 84 years, and he gave you all the reasons why that's not as, robust or accurate. And that idea about recall being creative, I was chuckling because my sister and I just took a trip and we met my brother. So there are three of us looking back at our life, and we all sort of saw it differently. So, recall is how accurate it is. So they decided to go forward, and then they have all the records. They have these documents so that they can be referenced to say, this is what happened. So if somebody has a different opinion, so that's why this is a substantial body of work. And 84% of the participants remained in it. You talked about dropout being a problem with going forward.
Retention is so hard
and funding,
in studies, but they did it.
And they kept this thing funded. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is an accomplishment.
Indeed.
Really, really good. But for me, it had limitations because it was men. It was all boys. And I'm going, well, excuse me.
Right. and they've noticed that.
Yeah, and that's what I say. So they didn't, in this report, they said, yeah, that's a limitation of this study or this body of people that we're looking at. And they've referenced in this book other longitudinal studies. There's a British cohort study. There's the Mills longitudinal study, which did include women from 1958. And then there's a multidisciplinary health and development study in New Zealand that was started in 1972. So we've got the British Isles and we've got the New Zealand. And then there's the Hawaiian longitudinal study that includes Japanese, Filipino, Hawaiians. And so, there are coming other investigators that are flushing out what Harvard couldn't think of in 1938 as they designed this thing. So that's the body of data that they used for the rest of the discussion, I think.
And they're still collecting data.
Yeah, these studies are continuing. They're amazing. And there's a Chicago Health and Aging Social Relations study, which includes some African Americans.
Good.
Yeah, so it looks like we're getting a better picture. But even so, they keep coming down with one conclusion. I don't know when we'll share it, but they've looked at this from all sorts of angles, and they've got an idea that can help the rest of us.
We talk about things that are toxic for us, like smoking cigarettes. We all know that now. In diet culture, we talk about how some foods are toxic, and but what this research points out in this is that loneliness is actually more toxic than most things. Loneliness.
Mm-hmm. Isolation.
Yeah.
Didn't we read a book about smartphones?
We did.
And
how to break up with your phone.
And one of the reasons she wrote the book was she was thinking we were isolating ourselves with this digital interface, separating us from other people.
Right. It's taking away the time we're spending together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So loneliness.
So loneliness kills is what the author says, right? Mm-hmm. Because people who are feeling alone tend to have a shorter life, and they found that was more powerful than smoking cigarettes even.
Absolutely, yeah. There's another point that they made in here that I found charming was the division of science and the ancients. There's a lot of ancient wisdom out there in the world, and science doesn't really connect to it very well. And in this study, they're saying, well, here's an opportunity to blend these two things together. And they reference people like Aristotle, and I learned some new words. Eudaimonia and hedonia. Mm-hmm. Hedonia I'd sort of heard of because hedonism.
Right.
Yeah, fleeting pleasure, fleeting happiness. But this other one is meaningful and has purpose, and it's that thing that makes you feel that joy and awe type thing that we've talked about in other books. But that's Aristotle a long time ago. And then there was this
long time ago.
Lao Tzu. How do you say? I'm not good with the Oriental language, but Lao, Lao, T-Z-U, Zhu. Shu. Okay. Lao Shu. He was the one that said, if you give, the greater your abundance is going to be. And we've heard that recently, but that's old news. It's nothing new. That idea of generosity is something that makes you healthier and happier. But so I like that these fellas looked backwards to the ancients. There was no data, but there were nuggets of wisdom that they kind of pulled together into this research as well.
Right. They're like, see, look, our data
It's true.
tells us that
That's
this is true. Yeah.
No brainer. No, but we had a book about it.
But, the antidote to loneliness is a term that I hadn't heard of before. They call social fitness.
I love that. Keep going. This is good. Social fitness.
Yeah.
Instead of physical fitness.
Exactly. We all think exercise is what we need to do all the time, or eating healthy is the key. Actually, it's social fitness that can be protective of our health. And
that word protection is important because life is hard. And we get fearful, and then we pull in. And so something that protects us is going to give us an opportunity for health and happiness.
Somebody bring it? Oh. And the fitness part reminds us that, kind of like brushing our teeth, we don't just have to do it once. Like exercising, we don't just go to the gym once and we're done. Social fitness means we're actively working on our relationships and reaching out, because if you're like me and an introvert and just human nature, sometimes it's not natural to reach out. And then we have these devices like our smartphones who are interfering, right, with those opportunities. So the authors really encourage us to not do what we think we want to do, but actually take those chances to be social, because we'll end up happier.
Right, and so I want to compliment you in our business community here. I think I've mentioned this before, but yeah, Kristen came up with a great idea and lobbied for it, and now it's in motion. It's a net walking group. So in that walking, we're getting some physical exercise, but we're also having this social interaction. So our fitness is more holistic in that 1 hour a week that some of these business folks are taking together. It's a novel idea, so congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the social and fitness, it's a perfect example of that. Yeah.
Oh, well, there's a moment of quietness. Let me fill it up. When we're looking at social fitness, he does give us some ways to assess that. And I found those very helpful. You make a little list of the 6 people that are closest to you, or you could have 10. Some of us can't come up with 10 names, though. And that's in itself revealing to saying maybe my social fitness is not as healthy as it could be.
Maybe, but they do point out that it is the quality and not the quantity of friends. But I like these tools because it has you stop and evaluate.
You did, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you look at them and you say, is this relationship with this person energizing or depleting? And is it frequent or infrequent? And so you build this little diagram, and in the process of doing that, you get some insight
Into your social universe, that's what they say, yeah. And they say, well, if someone is depleting you, that doesn't necessarily mean you kick them out of your life, but it's a chance to evaluate. And then maybe the people that are energizing, you see that you're not really interacting with them frequently enough, and maybe you can make a point to do that.
And then he has some ideas about that as well. As what can you do, and how do you do that? And if as I said, if you've screwed up, maybe there are some ways to recover. And maybe not by knee-jerking or the way you've always done it, but by some thoughtful, new behavioral development. And I don't know if we want to get into that right now. The thing I wanted to talk about is where you are. I mean, with these relationships, when you're in high school, and these boys that started this study were adolescents. They were, some of them were sophomores in college, and some of them were probably in the working class, living at home with parents in a less economically rich community of Boston. So these two study groups are quite different. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to say, does your lottery in life, who you were born to, how, does that influence your happiness? Is it just like if you're down on your luck and you live in the slums, you're never going to be happy? And they don't come to that conclusion.
Right.
Yeah. So, but they needed to find out, did just the luck of the draw, who you get born to, what kind of parents you have, are they loving, or do they beat you? What's going on in that early development? Because what happens in your childhood is something that we need to figure out. What is the influence of that early childhood development? Because it does influence future development. But as I have read a lot of social literature about life stages, and I think you may have too, this was the best.
Oh, yeah.
I just loved thinking about, okay, young adulthood, here are the situations, and then meeting some people and hearing the data they collected from those people and what they were thinking about their life at that time. And then 20 years later, if they were married, going back and seeing what they were thinking. Did you?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
It really is.
But the life stage story was really well done in this book.
I am Kristen Norton, registered dietitian at Well Balanced Nutrition, where we offer nutrition and wellness coaching. Please visit our website to see if nutrition coaching is right for you at wellbalancednutrition.com.
And on that topic, they were discussing how important it is to eat at home. And Kristen has good ideas about how to do that.
Yes, I help people do that all the time.
Yeah, and it could be a healthy thing, right? And I'm Eleanor Russell at 360 Health, and we like to help people supplement their diet because sometimes they don't get the nutrients they need. So if you're questioning how do I do that and what are the right choices for me, we have a wonderful little assessment that we can help you get a report, and we can discuss it and go from there. So you can contact me at 360health, 4u.com.
And if the listeners don't have a copy of The Good Life but want one, they can get it from our website. That's healthgeekpodcast.com. And you can go to the bookstore and buy it from us, essentially.
There you go. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
It will take you to Amazon, but
Yeah.
that supports our podcast, and we appreciate it so much if you would purchase it through that link.
Yes.
Have a good read, everybody. We'll be back on this one in another episode.
Views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.